Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. Dr. Silas Trenholm sat in his Cambridge office on a cold November evening in 2039, staring at another rejection letter. The words blurred together after the fifth reading. Pseudoscience. Unfounded speculation. Not suitable for publication. His theories about consciousness interacting with space-time had been dismissed by every major journal in theoretical physics. At 39, he should have been at the peak of his career. Instead, he was grading undergraduate papers and teaching introductory courses to students who would never understand why he'd once believed he could change the world. The knock on his door came at 9:47 p.m. He wasn't expecting anyone. A woman stood in the hallway dressed in an unmarked black suit that seemed to absorb the fluorescent light. She carried no briefcase, no identification, just a single sealed envelope. She didn't introduce herself. She simply placed the envelope on his desk and left without a word. Silas turned the envelope over in his hands. On the front was a symbol he recognized from his graduate research into ancient astronomy, a Babylonian glyph representing the space between stars. His fingers trembled slightly as he broke the seal. Inside was an invitation to join something called the Daedalus Consortium at an undisclosed location. No details about the work. No explanation of why they wanted him. Just a salary figure that made his eyes widen and a date 3 days away. At the bottom, handwritten in black ink, "Your theories were correct. Come see why." He packed a single bag that night. Whatever waited for him, it had to be better than watching his life's work gather dust in filing cabinets that nobody would ever open. The journey began with a blindfold in a military transport that climbed for hours. When the blindfold came off, he was floating in zero gravity, staring through a viewport at the Earth and Moon hanging in perfect balance. They were at the L2 Lagrange point, one of the gravitational sweet spots where objects could maintain stable orbits. The station itself was enormous, a sprawling complex of modules and laboratories that had no business existing without the world knowing about it. Dr. Evangeline Cross met him in the docking bay. She was a severe woman in her 50s with grey hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin. Her eyes were the coldest blue Silas had ever seen. The kind of eyes that had watched people die and felt nothing. "Welcome to Daedalus Station," she said, without offering her hand. "You'll meet the rest of the team shortly. First, I need you to sign these." The documents were extensive, non-disclosure agreements, liability waivers, acknowledgements that he understood his participation was voluntary, but that leaving the program would be complicated. The final page made him pause. "I understand that the work conducted here may challenge my understanding of physics, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself." Something in his gut told him to refuse, to demand transport back to Earth immediately. But his hand signed anyway, muscle memory overriding instinct. The crew gathered in a briefing room that smelled of recycled air and coffee that'd been sitting too long on the burner. Captain Orrin Dacre was introduced first. A test pilot in his mid-40s with the kind of weathered face that came from years of pushing experimental aircraft to their limits. He had a nervous energy that didn't match his confident smile. His hands trembled when he reached for his coffee cup, and he laughed too loud at jokes that weren't funny. Dr. Mireille Kestroff was a neuroscientist whose research into the quantum aspects of consciousness had gotten her blacklisted from mainstream academia, just like Silas. She had kind eyes, but spoke in a measured way that suggested she was constantly editing herself, choosing words carefully to avoid revealing too much. Tobias Kiernan, the chief engineer, was a compact man who spoke only in technical specifications and avoided eye contact with everyone. His jumpsuit was stained with grease and something darker that might have been old blood. 6 other crew members were present, navigators and technicians whose names Silas didn't catch in the rapid introductions. They had the hollow-eyed look of people who hadn't slept well in months. And then there was Archdeacon Alaric Verdon. The Jesuit priest stood in the corner of the room, a gaunt figure in his 60s wearing simple black clothes without a collar. His presence made no sense in a physics facility. When Silas asked why a priest was part of an advanced physics project, Dr. Cross simply said he was there for morale and cultural consultation, then moved on before he could ask follow-up questions. But Silas had glimpsed Verdon's quarters on the way to the briefing room. The door had been opened just enough to see inside. Cuneiform tablets in protective cases, medieval grimoires with cracked leather bindings, documents marked with Nazi insignias, photographs of archaeological digs that looked decades old. Whatever Verdon's real purpose was, it had nothing to do with morale. Dr. Cross dimmed the lights and pulled up a holographic display. "Gentlemen, Dr. Kestroff, let me show you what we've built." The image rotated slowly in the center of the room. A spacecraft unlike anything Silas had seen, with curves and angles that seemed to fold in on themselves in ways that made his eyes water when he tried to follow them. The design was beautiful and nauseating, in equal measure, like staring at architecture from a dream that was starting to turn into a nightmare. "The Chariot of Icarus," Dr. Cross said, "a functional Alcubierre drive vessel." The room went silent. One of the technicians made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. Silas felt his breath catch. The Alcubierre drive was theoretical, a mathematical possibility that required exotic matter and energy conditions that shouldn't exist in nature. It would allow faster-than-light travel by contracting space in front of the ship and expanding it behind, creating a bubble of warped space-time that could move faster than light without technically violating relativity. He'd written papers about it in graduate school, wild speculations about the future of space travel, but actually building one? That was impossible. The energy requirements alone would dwarf anything humanity had ever produced. "We've solved the exotic matter problem," Dr. Cross continued, her voice flat and professional, "manipulating quantum vacuum fluctuations through controlled Casimir effect generation. The ship is ready for testing, and that's why you're here, Dr. Trenholm. We need someone who understands the theoretical framework to help us understand why our unmanned tests keep failing." The hologram disappeared, replaced by files marked with red classification stamps, 17 folders, each labelled with a date, and the word "failure" in bold letters. "These are our unmanned test flights," Dr. Cross said. "I need you to watch them, all of them. Then tell me what we're doing wrong." She left him alone in the briefing room with access to the files. Silas started with the first one, recorded 3 years earlier. The probe had been simple, just instruments and cameras, launched through the warp bubble to test the basic functionality. The footage showed the probe returning after 7 minutes. The exterior was intact, no obvious damage. But when they opened it remotely, the cameras revealed the interior was wrong. The walls were smeared with something black and viscous that reflected the light in strange ways. Chemical analysis identified it as carbonized proteins. Human proteins. There had been no humans in the probe. The audio recordings were worse. 7 minutes of flight, and for 6 of those minutes, silence. Normal operational sounds. Then, in the final minute, something else. A sound that started low and rose in pitch, rhythmic and awful. It took Silas several replays to realize he was hearing screaming. Multiple voices, overlapping, screaming in harmony. The second probe came back with its instruments fused into spirals that shouldn't have been possible given the internal dimensions of the probe. The metal had somehow folded through itself. occupying the same space in ways that violated basic geometry. The third probe never returned. Sensors showed it entering the warp bubble, then nothing. It simply ceased to exist anywhere in detectable space. The fourth probe made Silas pause the playback and sit in silence for 5 minutes before he could continue. It had returned inside out. The hull that should have been on the outside was somehow on the inside, and vice versa. The cameras had been reversed too, pointing outward through the interior walls, and they'd captured something in those final seconds before the probe collapsed into scrap metal. Darkness. And in that darkness, movement. Things that were aware and watching. He forced himself through all 17 files, each one worse than the last. Handprints on interior walls, despite empty probes. Teeth embedded in metal bulkheads. Human molars fused into steel. Scorch marks in the shape of human silhouettes, positioned as if someone had been pressed against the wall and burned away, leaving only their shadow. And always, in every recording, that screaming. Each time in different languages, linguistic analysis suggested phonetic structures that predated known human civilization. Some of the sounds weren't possible for human vocal cords to produce, yet they clearly came from throats and mouths and lungs. Silas pulled up the technical reports, looking for any explanation that made sense. One phrase appeared repeatedly in the classified notes, typed in red font, as if someone had wanted to emphasize its importance. Neural anchoring absent, consciousness stabilization failure, probability of unmanned success, 0%. He found Mireille in the station's small cafeteria, eating something that might have been pasta but had the texture of rubber. She looked up when he sat down across from her. "You watched the files," she said. It wasn't a question. "What does neural anchoring mean?" She set down her fork. "The official explanation is that our models suggest the warp bubble passes through something we're calling the interstice, a space between normal space-time. The mathematics indicate that a living consciousness is required to anchor the bubble and prevent it from collapsing during transit." "And the unofficial explanation?" "The unofficial explanation is that we're not traveling through empty space. We're traveling through something that's occupied, and whatever lives there won't let us pass unless we give it something in return." "That's insane." "Is it? You theorized that consciousness interacts with quantum fields in your papers. What if you were right? What if awareness itself is what stabilizes reality during the transition? Or what if it's simpler than that? What if the things on the other side just need to feed?" Silas stared at her. "Feed? On consciousness. On whatever it is that makes us more than meat and electricity." She picked up her fork again, pushing food around her plate. "Captain Dacre volunteers for the first crew jump in 2 days. I've tried to talk him out of it, but he won't listen. Says someone has to be first. I think he's just tired of being afraid." That night, Silas couldn't sleep. He floated in his small quarters, staring at the ceiling, thinking about those screams in the recordings, wondering what could make sounds like that, wondering if he'd be making similar sounds soon. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He opened the door to find Archdeacon Verdun standing in the corridor. "Walk with me," the priest said. They moved through the empty corridors of the station, past darkened laboratories and sealed doors, marked with warning signs. Verdun led him to an observation deck where Earth hung below them, a blue marble wrapped in swirling white clouds. "You want to leave?" Verdun said. "Yes." "But you won't." "No." "Do you know why?" Silas thought about it. "Because if this is real, if we've actually built a faster-than-light drive, then nothing else matters. Not my career, not my safety, not even my life. This changes everything." That's what they told Captain Dacre. That's what they told all of us. And it's true in a way. This does change everything. Verdun turned to face him. "But not in the way you think." What do you mean? I've spent 40 years studying what ancient civilizations knew that we've forgotten. The Sumerians had a word, Kur. It meant the underworld, but also the space between spaces. The Babylonians called it the Apsu, the primordial waters beneath reality. Every culture has stories of a place where the dead go, where things that were never quite alive wait and watch. Mythology. Perhaps. Or perhaps they were describing something real in the only language they had available. Your Alcubierre drive doesn't just bend space, Dr. Trenholm. It rips through the membrane between our reality and what lies beneath. And what lies beneath is very old, very patient, and very hungry. Silas wanted to laugh, to dismiss this as religious nonsense. But he'd seen those files. He'd heard those screams. If you believe that, why are you here? Why help them? Burden smiled, but there was no warmth in it, because they'll do it with or without me. At least this way, I can bear witness. Someone should remember what we're really doing here. When the consequences come, someone should understand why. What do you know that you're not saying? Everything, Dr. Trenholm. I know everything. And soon you will too. Captain Orrin Dacre suited up on a Wednesday morning, with shaking hands and a smile that looked painted on. He made jokes about punching holes through the universe, about going where no one had gone before. The other crew members laughed at the appropriate moments, but their laughter sounded forced, mechanical. Silas found him in the equipment bay an hour before launch, smoking a cigarette in violation of every safety protocol. "You don't have to do this," Silas said. Dacre took a long drag, held it, exhaled slowly. "Yeah, I do." "Why?" "Because I've been first before. First to break Mach 7. First to pilot the Mars orbital shuttle. First to do a lot of things. That's what I am. That's all I am. And if I'm not first, then what's the point? Staying alive might be a point. You saw the files. You know what's out there. Something has to change. Someone has to make it through. Why not me?" "Because you're terrified." Dacre's smile finally cracked. "Of course I'm terrified. Terror is just your body telling you something matters. The day I stop being scared is the day I stop being alive." He dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his boot. "Besides, what's the worst that can happen? I die? I've been dying since the day I was born. We all have. At least this way, I die doing something that means something." The night before launch, Verdun performed a ceremony in the hangar bay where the chariot of Icarus hung suspended in its cradle. He claimed it was a blessing, a ritual for good fortune. But the words he spoke weren't Latin. They were harsh and guttural, syllables that seemed to catch in his throat like barbed wire. The sounds hurt to hear, made Silas's teeth ache and his vision blur at the edges. Later, he looked up the phonetics in the station's linguistics database. Akkadian, an ancient Mesopotamian language dead for thousands of years. The translation was fragmentary, but certain phrases came through clearly. Payment for passage, blood for the crossing, meat for the mouths that wait below. The other crew members stood at a distance during the ceremony, watching. They were uncomfortable but not surprised. They'd seen this before. They knew what it meant. Silas pulled Tobias aside after. "What was that really about?" The engineer looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. "Insurance? Or payment? Take your pick. Payment for what?" Tobias started to walk away, then stopped. "You ever wonder why we stopped going to the moon? Why we gave up on Mars? Why every space program in the world scaled back in the 70s and 80s, right when we should have been expanding? Budget cuts, political priorities. That's what they told everyone. But my grandfather worked at NASA during Apollo. He told me things before he died. Told me about the transmissions they couldn't explain. About the astronauts who came back wrong, speaking languages they'd never learned. About the night terrors that never stopped. We stopped going, because someone realized we weren't alone up there, and whatever else was out there didn't want company. Then why start again? Because we forgot, or because we stopped caring, or because some sins are too profitable to avoid. Tobias walked away, leaving Silas alone in the hangar with the ship and the silence. Launch day arrived with the sterile efficiency of a surgical procedure. Dacre suited up, sealed himself inside the chariot of Icarus, and gave a thumbs up through the viewport that looked more like a goodbye than a gesture of confidence. Silas watched from the observation room as the crew began the activation sequence. The technical readouts meant nothing to him, just numbers scrolling across screens, but he could feel the change in the air, a pressure building, a sense of reality holding its breath. The warp bubble generation was unlike anything he'd ever witnessed. The ship didn't accelerate. It didn't move in any conventional sense. It simply began to not exist. The space around it darkened, but not from absence of light. It was a positive darkness, a presence rather than a void. The ship folded into that darkness like paper being crumpled, and then it was gone. 7 minutes of silence followed. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. The only sound was Mireille's quiet breathing beside him and the hum of the station's life support systems. Silas counted the seconds, 420 of them, each one feeling like an hour. Then the ship returned. It unfolded from nothing, suddenly present in the hangar, as if it had never left. The hull was intact. Systems showed green across the board. Internal temperature normal. Air pressure normal. Everything normal. They'd done it. Faster than light travel. 12 light years in 7 minutes. Humanity's greatest achievement. The celebration lasted approximately 15 seconds. They opened the hatch remotely, cameras showing the interior of the ship. Dacre was still strapped in his seat, alive, breathing, moving. But something was wrong with the way he moved. Too fluid. Too smooth, like he was underwater. The medical team rushed to extract him. When they got the helmet off, his eyes were wrong. The pupils were dilated so wide there was almost no iris visible, just black circles that seemed to go deeper than eyes should go. And when he opened his mouth, the words that came out weren't English. They were Proto-Sumerian, phrases from a civilization that died 4,000 years ago, spoken in perfect accent by a man who'd barely graduated high school and had never studied ancient languages. The medical team rushed him to the infirmary. Silas followed, watching as they strapped Dacre to a bed and began running scans. The brain imaging made everyone in the room go silent. Massive damage to the limbic system. Tissue that looked like it had been cauterized by intense heat, burnt and blackened and dead. But the ship's interior temperature had remained constant throughout the flight. There was no physical source for the burns. Over the next 48 hours, Dacre slowly regained the ability to speak English, though the ancient phrases would slip in randomly, his tongue moving in ways that looked painful. He described what he'd experienced during those 7 minutes. "The ship went somewhere else," he said, his voice barely audible. "Not space, not anywhere real, somewhere underneath everything." There were faces pressed against the hull from outside. Thousands of them, maybe millions, all watching me, all whispering. "What did they whisper?" Mireille asked gently, her pen poised over her notepad. Dacre's eyes filled with tears. "Everything. They knew everything about me, my name, my daughter's name, how she died. The last words she said to me. They knew things I've never told anyone. Private things. Shameful things. They spoke with her voice, my dead daughter's voice, begging me to open the door and let her in. Promising she could come home if I just opened the airlock. Did you consider it?" I put my hand on the release lever. I was going to do it. God help me, I wanted to. But then I looked out the viewport and saw what was really out there. Not my daughter. Not faces. just mouths. Thousands of mouths pressed against the hull, opening and closing, teeth that went back forever. And I realized the voices weren't coming from outside. They were already inside the ship, inside my head. They'd been inside me since the moment we entered the bubble. He grabbed Mireille's wrist with sudden strength. They're still inside. Even now, I can feel them in my skull, moving around, exploring. They know I'm talking to you. They know everything I'm thinking. And they're laughing. They think it's funny that we believe we can travel through their territory without paying the toll. What toll? Silas asked from the doorway. Dacre turned to look at him. For just a moment, his eyes went completely black. No whites visible at all. Then they returned to normal. Life, he said. They want life, consciousness, whatever it is that makes us more than meat. And they're going to take it, one way or another. 3 days later, Orrin Dacre fashioned a noose from torn bedsheets and hanged himself in his quarters. He did it during a shift change when no one was monitoring his room. They found him an hour later, body cold, face purple, eyes still open and staring at something no one else could see. His suicide note was brief, written in shaking handwriting that degraded into illegibility halfway through. They won't stop looking at me. Even when I close my eyes, they're looking through my skull, through my thoughts, through everything. I can feel their teeth, not on my skin, on my soul. They're chewing, and I can't make them stop. And I can't. The rest was scribbles and symbols that linguistic analysis couldn't identify. Dr. Cross ordered another test within the week. The speed of it shocked Silas. A man had just killed himself because of what he'd experienced, and they were already planning to send someone else through that nightmare. A technician named Peter Valdez volunteered. He was young, maybe 26, with a wife and a 9-month-old daughter back on Earth who had a rare genetic condition that insurance companies decided wasn't worth treating. The hazard pay from a successful jump would cover 5 years of experimental therapy. He had everything to live for and nothing to lose. "Don't do this," Silas told him the night before launch. "You saw what happened to Dacre." Dacre was unstable, Valdez said, though his voice lacked conviction. The psyche valves should have caught it. I'm stronger, mentally stronger. I can handle it. This isn't about mental strength. Then what is it about? Because from where I'm standing, it's about whether my daughter lives or dies. And I'll go through anything if it means she gets a chance. Even that? Valdez looked away, especially that. Peter Valdez didn't come back whole. His body returned, still strapped into the pilot seat, still technically alive for the first 30 seconds after the hatch opened. Then he died. The footage from the internal cameras would haunt Silas for the rest of his life. Valdez had been breathing normally for 6 minutes and 43 seconds of the flight. Then something changed. His body went rigid. His mouth opened in a scream that made no sound. His hands clawed at his chest as if trying to rip something out. And then he simply deflated. That was the only word for it, like a balloon, with the air let out. His skin collapsed inward, wrapping tight around his bones. His eyes sank into his skull. His organs seemed to liquefy and drain away through invisible holes. In the span of 5 seconds, he went from a healthy young man to a desiccated corpse that looked like it had been buried in a desert for 1,000 years. The medical team examined what was left. Every drop of water was gone from his body. Neural tissue showed complete electrical drainage, as if something had sucked out every ion, every spark that made his neurons fire. His brain was hollow, a dried sponge rattling inside a skull. But worst of all were his eyes. They'd remained open during the process, and the cameras had caught his final expression. Not pain, not fear, recognition. He'd seen something in those last seconds, something he had recognized, and the recognition had been worse than anything else. Silas spent that night breaking into the restricted archives, Security was lax, or perhaps they wanted him to find what was there. Either way, he needed answers. The files went back decades. Multiple nations, multiple attempts at achieving faster-than-light travel, all ending in catastrophe. Die Glock, the bell. Nazi experiments from 1944. Test subjects placed inside a bell-shaped chamber exposed to what the researchers called temporal displacement. The results matched perfectly. Cauterized brain tissue, bodies drained of vital fluids, survivors speaking dead languages. Heinrich Himmler's personal notes captured after the war. The engine requires payment. The Watchers demand tribute. This is not mechanical failure. This is cosmic law. Cosmorod. A Soviet project from 1967. Cosmonaut bodies fused to spacecraft walls, their flesh merged with metal. Sensor readings showed electrical activity in the metal itself for days afterward. Neural firing patterns. They were still conscious somehow, still aware, experiencing something between life and death. An American Black project from 1981. Animals used instead of humans. Dogs, primates, dolphins. The craft returned filled with corpses turned inside out, but the audio logs captured the animals speaking with human voices in extinct languages, describing stars and planets and civilizations that had died billions of years ago, before dying themselves. Every attempt, every nation, the same result. Something waited, in the space between spaces, something that demanded payment for passage. Silas was still reading when Verdun found him. "I was wondering when you'd come here," the priest said, settling into a chair. "Most people make it to the archives by the second day. You lasted longer than average." "You knew about all of this?" "Of course. Why do you think they brought me?" He pulled out a tablet and brought up images of cuneiform tablets. The Sumerians called it the Celestial River. The Babylonians, the Apsu. Every ancient culture has stories of a space between spaces, a place where things dwell that should not be disturbed. They're just myths. Are they? Your mathematics proved that faster-than-light travel requires bending space-time itself, creating a bubble that moves through dimensions we can't normally perceive. What if those dimensions aren't empty? What are they? The ancient texts call them by many names: Watchers, Devourers, the ones who wait below. The Sumerians believed they were primordial gods lurking in the chaos beyond reality. I think there's something we don't have words for yet, something that exists in the spaces we're not meant to travel through. Verdun pulled up another image, a Babylonian star chart. These tablets date to 2400 BCE. They describe priests who spoke with those who dwell between worlds. The tablets detail sacrificial rites, always involving living humans, always performed before attempting passage through the sky river to distant stars. You're saying the Sumerians had faster-than-light travel? I'm saying they knew about it. Their civilization collapsed suddenly around 2000 BCE, vanished almost overnight. Their cities were abandoned, their people gone. No war, no plague, they just stopped existing. And before they vanished, their final texts speak of the river rising and the mouths opening to swallow the world. Silas felt cold despite the climate control. Then why are we doing it? Because the consortium isn't a research project, it's a commercial enterprise. There are trillions of dollars at stake. Colony ships are already being designed. This is happening whether I participate or not. At least this way, someone knows the truth. When does it end? Verdun's smile was sad. It doesn't. Not well, anyway. Dr. Cross announced the next test 3 days later. Full crew this time, 5 people to maximize consciousness stabilization. A young pilot named Hannah Ortiz had volunteered, along with 3 experienced technicians. Silas refused to participate. He stood in Dr. Cross's office and told her he wouldn't be part of another murder. She listened patiently, her expression never changing. "I understand your concerns," she said when he finished. "They're noted. Security will escort you to the crew quarters now." "I'm not going." She pressed the button on her desk. 2 security officers entered, large men with dead eyes. "You signed a contract, Dr. Trenholm. You agreed to participate in all research activities deemed necessary by project leadership. This is necessary." "I'll refuse. You can't force me into that ship." "We can actually, and we will." She nodded to the security officers. "Sedate him. Get him strapped in." Silas woke up in the co-pilot seat of the Chariot of Icarus with a splitting headache and the taste of sedatives coating his mouth like oil. His hands were already strapped into the restraints. His helmet was sealed. Through the viewport, he could see the hangar bay and the observation windows where the research team watched. Hannah Ortiz sat in the pilot seat beside him. She was young, maybe 30, with the kind of calm focus that came from years of flight training, but her hands shook on the controls. "I'm sorry," she said without looking at him. "They told me you'd volunteered. I didn't know they drugged you." "Let me out." "I can't. The exterior locks engage automatically 30 minutes before launch. We're sealed in." She finally turned to face him. "My son has leukemia. Stage 4. The experimental treatments cost $3 million. Insurance won't cover it. This one flight pays for everything. He's 7 years old. I'd go through anything for him." Behind them, 3 technicians sat in the passenger compartment. One was reading from a pocket Bible, lips moving silently. Another was crying, tears floating in the zero gravity. The third stared at nothing, his expression blank. "You don't know what you're doing," Silas said. "You don't know what's waiting out there." "I know enough. I know Dacre killed himself. I know Valdez died during transit. I know whatever's in the interstices is dangerous. But I also know my son is dying, and this is his only chance." She checked the navigation systems one last time. "I can live with going through hell if it means he gets to live." The countdown began. 60 seconds. 50. 40. Silas struggled against the restraints, but they were designed to hold during high G maneuvers. He wasn't getting out. 20 seconds. 10. "God help us," one of the technicians whispered. The warp bubble activated. Reality didn't break. It peeled away like old wallpaper, revealing what lay underneath. The transition happened in stages, each worse than the last. First, the light changed. The hangar bay outside became distant, as if viewed through murky water. Colours shifted toward the red end of the spectrum, then beyond, into wavelengths that Silas's eyes shouldn't have been able to perceive but somehow did. Second, the sound changed. The hum of the ship's systems took on a rhythmic quality, a pulse that matched his heartbeat. Then other sounds joined it. Whispers. Hundreds of them, thousands, all slightly out of sync, creating a cacophony that made his teeth ache. Third, the walls changed. The metal interior of the ship became something else, not transparent but permeable. Silas could see through the hull into what lay beyond, and what he saw made his mind try to shut down rather than process it. Space outside wasn't black, it was alive. Movement everywhere, not random, purposeful, hungry. Things that couldn't exist pressed against the hull from outside, their forms shifting too rapidly to focus on. But their faces remained constant. Human faces. Thousands of them. Millions of them. Pressed against the membrane of the hull like bodies trapped under ice, their features distorted by the pressure, mouths opening and closing in rhythms that might have been speech, or might have been chewing. Silas recognized some of them. Peter Valdez was there, his face stretched across a square meter of hull, eyes wide and aware, mouth forming words over and over. The same word. Hungry, hungry, hungry. Orrin Dacre was there too, but not in one piece. His face appeared in multiple locations across the ship's interior, as if his consciousness had been shattered and scattered, each fragment aware and suffering separately. Others he didn't know stared in at him. Cosmonauts in Soviet uniforms from the 1960s. Nazi test pilots with swastika insignias still visible on their flight suits. People in ancient robes, their clothing styles from civilizations that had died millennia ago. All of them aware, all of them trapped, all of them hungry. And behind them, deeper in the darkness, something larger moved. Something vast and patient and old beyond comprehension. He couldn't see its shape, only the absence where it existed, a hole in reality that bent everything around it. His mother's voice spoke directly into his ear, intimate and loving. "Silas, honey, I've been waiting for you. I've been so cold, so hungry. Please let me in." He jerked his head around. No one was there. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, speaking directly into his auditory cortex, without needing air or vibration. "Mom?" His voice cracked. She'd been dead for 6 years. He'd held her hand as the cancer ate her from the inside out, watched her last breath rattle out of failing lungs. "Yes, baby, it's me. I'm right outside. Just open the door. I can come home if you just open the airlock. I miss you so much. I miss everything. Please, please let me in." The voice was perfect. The exact tone and cadence he remembered. The way she'd called him baby even when he was an adult. The slight rasp from years of smoking. "You're not real," he whispered, but his hand was already reaching for his restraint release. "I am real. I'm more real than I ever was before. I can see everything now. All of time. All of space. I've been watching you, Silas, watching you grieve, watching you blame yourself for not visiting enough when I was sick. I forgive you, but you have to let me in. You have to open the door." His fingers touched the release mechanism. One pull, and he'd be free of the restraints. One walk to the airlock. One simple press of a button. Behind him, one of the technicians screamed. Not a scream of fear, a scream of recognition. Silas tore his eyes away from the hull to look back. The technician who'd been crying was now laughing, a high-pitched sound that went on far too long without breath. Her eyes had gone completely black. Not just the pupils, but the entire eye, as if someone had filled the sockets with ink. She began to speak, but not in her own voice. Multiple voices came from her throat simultaneously, overlapping, creating harmonies that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. We remember when stars were young. We remember when galaxies formed from chaos. We remember the first consciousness that emerged in the primordial dark. We were there. We've always been there. Waiting, feeding, growing. Hannah Ortiz unbuckled her restraints with mechanical precision. She stood, moving with that same fluid, underwater grace that Dacre had shown. She walked toward the rear of the cabin, her expression serene, almost blissful. "Hannah, no!" Silas screamed, but she didn't seem to hear him. She placed her palm flat against the hull. The metal rippled under her touch like water, creating concentric circles that spread outward. Then the wall opened. Not a door. Not a hatch. The wall simply ceased to be solid. It became a mouth, edges lined with something that looked like teeth but moved like fingers, grasping and flexing. Beyond the opening was darkness so absolute that light seemed to fall into it and die. Hannah stepped through without hesitation. The wall closed behind her. Her restraint harness was still buckled in the pilot's seat, but her body was gone, consumed, taken, fed to whatever waited in that darkness. The ship's communication system crackled to life without anyone touching the controls. Voices filled the cabin, overlapping, speaking in languages that predated human civilization. Babylonian, Akkadian, something older than both. And underneath it all, a rhythm, a chant, a hymn to gods that had never been worshipped, because humanity had been wise enough to fear them. Silas understood the words somehow, despite never having learned these languages. The interstice was translating for him, letting him comprehend. Blood for passage, meat for the crossing, consciousness for the hungry mouths. The toll is paid. The toll is always paid. The toll will never be enough. The technician with the Bible was praying frantically, his voice rising in pitch and speed. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. His prayer cut off mid-word. His mouth kept moving, but different sounds emerged. Proto-Sumerian phrases describing the deaths of stars, the birth of black holes, the heat death of previous universes. Information that a human mind shouldn't be able to contain flooded out of him in a torrent. Then he began to describe things that hadn't happened yet. Events in the future, specific dates, specific deaths, the collapse of nations, the extinction of species, his own death, which would occur in 47 seconds when his heart simply stopped, overwhelmed by the neurological feedback from having his consciousness temporarily invaded by something vast and incomprehensible. 47 seconds later, he died. His head slumped forward. His eyes remained open, now empty, whatever had been inside them having departed. The third technician, the one who'd been staring at nothing, suddenly turned to look directly at Silas. Her face was wrong. The proportions were slightly off, as if someone had put on a mask of human features but didn't quite understand how they fit together. "Hello, Dr. Trenholm," she said, but the voice wasn't hers. It was Mireille's voice. "Can you hear me? I'm trying to reach you from the station, but the interference is incredible. If you can hear this, you need to understand. Every jump is a ritual. Every voyage is a sacrifice. The drive works because something on the other side accepts the offering." The technician's face rippled, and suddenly it was Dr. Cross's face. Her features stretched across someone else's skull. "We've known from the beginning, Dr. Trenholm. The mathematics were always clear. Passage requires payment. We just had to find out how much." Another ripple, and the face became Verdon's. "The gods never left us. They were only waiting for us to return to their sea." The technician's body collapsed then, all strings cut simultaneously. She slumped in her restraints, breathing shallowly, her mind somewhere else, somewhere between here and there. Silas was alone with corpses and empty shells, hurtling through a space that rejected physics and sanity in equal measure. His mother's voice called again, closer now. "I'm so proud of you, baby. You've come so far. Just a little farther. Just open the door. We can be together again, forever, in the spaces between spaces, where time doesn't matter, and pain doesn't exist, and hunger is the only truth." He looked at the airlock control. His hand was still reaching for it. Had been reaching for it this entire time without him consciously moving it. His body was trying to obey the voice even as his mind screamed at him to stop. The faces in the walls pressed closer. The thing moving in the darkness beyond began to take shape, and Silas realized with horror that it wasn't one thing. It was many things. Millions of consciousnesses that had passed through the interstice over thousands of years, all of them merged and combined and digested into a single vast entity that thought and felt and hungered with the collective awareness of everyone it had ever consumed. And it wanted him, not just to consume, to add, to incorporate, to make him part of the whole. He would be one more consciousness in the collective, one more voice in the choir, one more face pressed against the hull, waiting for the next ship to pass through. The 7 minutes were almost up, he could feel it. Time worked differently here, but some internal clock told him they were about to transition back to normal space. The faces began screaming. Not in fear. In rage, they didn't want the ship to leave, didn't want to lose their chance to add more to their number. The collective entity pressed against the hull with crushing force, trying to break through before they could escape. The wall next to Silas began to crack. Not physically. The reality of the wall was cracking. the boundary between here and there becoming unstable. Through the cracks, he could see the darkness beyond beginning to seep in like water through a failing dam. His mother's voice became angry. "Why won't you let me in? I died alone, Silas. I died in pain. You promised you'd visit more. You promised you'd be there. But you weren't. You were too busy with your career. Now you owe me. You owe me everything. Open the door. Open the door." The chariot of Icarus began to shake violently. Warning alarms screamed. The transition was starting. The ship was folding itself back into normal space. The entity beyond the hull roared. The sound wasn't audible through ears. It resonated directly in Silas's bones, in his teeth, in the fluid of his inner ear. He could taste it on his tongue, feel it in his chest like a second heartbeat. And then, with a sensation like being turned inside out and back again, they were through. Normal space snapped back into existence around them, with an almost audible click. The hangar bay materialized outside the viewports. The faces vanished from the walls. The whispers cut off mid-syllable. Silence. Blessed, horrible silence. Silas sat in his restraints, breathing hard, covered in sweat despite the ship's climate control. 2 crew members were dead. 1 was catatonic. Hannah Ortiz was simply gone. And he could still hear the whispers, faint now, barely audible but present. The voices from the interstice hadn't stayed in the interstice. They'd followed him back. A connection had been made, a bridge established, and it wouldn't close just because he'd returned to normal space. The security team extracted them from the ship. Medical personnel swarmed over the survivors, checking vitals, asking questions that Silas couldn't process. Someone was shining a light in his eyes. Someone else was taking his blood pressure. He saw Dr. Cross through the crowd, her expression professionally neutral, making notes on a tablet. Satisfied. That was what her expression said. 2 people dead, 1 vanished, 1 catatonic. And she was satisfied. They kept him in medical isolation for 3 days. Brain scans showed abnormalities forming in his limbic system, the same cauterization patterns that Dacre had shown. But the progression was slower. Silas's exposure had been different, less direct somehow. Mireille visited on the 2nd day. She sat beside his bed and held his hand. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "For what?" "For not fighting harder to stop it. For letting them put you in that ship. For being part of this." The technician who survived, Angela Reyes. She's not responding to any stimuli. Her body is alive, but there's no one home. EEG shows activity. But it's wrong. The patterns don't match human consciousness. Can you help her? I don't know if she exists anymore in any meaningful sense. Mireille pulled out her tablet, showing him brain scans. This is what normal neural activity looks like. This is Angela now. The firing patterns are too organized, too rhythmic. This looks like something running on her wetware. Silas studied the scans. What's it computing? We don't know. She speaks sometimes, but not in English, ancient languages mostly. She describes things, stars we've never catalogued, planets we've never discovered. She's been providing coordinates. If they're accurate, if she really knows where these planetary systems are, then the things in the interstice can see across light years. They're showing us where to send more ships. Yes, and that's what terrifies me. Verdun visited on the 3rd day. He brought real coffee, contraband on a station where everything was rationed. "How are you feeling?" he asked, like there's something living in my head. Because there is. You made contact with them and they don't let go. The bridge is permanent. You'll hear them for the rest of your life. How long is that? Verdun sipped his coffee. The cauterization will spread. Months probably. Maybe a year. Eventually you'll either kill yourself like Dacre or slip away like Angela. Either way, the you that exists now will cease to be. Silas felt tired. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know. and because Dr. Cross is accelerating the timeline. The first colony ship launches in 6 months, 50,000 passengers. The media is calling it humanity's greatest achievement. They can't. They will. From their perspective, the test was a success. You survived. The ship returned intact. Casualties were expected and factored in from the beginning. Silas laughed bitterly. Acceptable losses. They've revised the numbers. Based on your flight, they think they can reduce casualties to 2%, 1,000 people per ship. They're already planning the marketing. 98% survival rate. And the other 2%? Hibernation failure. Tragic but unavoidable. The families will grieve, there will be compensation, and no one will ever know the truth. We have to stop it. We can't. I've been trying for 3 years. The consortium has government backing at the highest levels. Unlimited funding, public support. This is happening. Then what was the point of any of this? Verdon stood, moving to the window. The ancient civilizations that tried this didn't just fail. They vanished. The Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Mayans, the Anasazi, all of them reached a certain level of astronomical knowledge and disappeared overnight. You said that before. Because it matters. They didn't just stop existing. They were taken. Their entire civilizations fed to the collective until there were enough consciousnesses to shift the balance, to let the entity break through from their side. Silas opened his eyes. What are you saying? Every jump adds more to the collective. Eventually there will be enough of them to push through, to rip open the barrier. And when that happens, everything here will be consumed. Not just the people on the ships, everyone, everywhere. How many ships? I don't know. Hundreds, perhaps. The growth is exponential. They released Silas with restrictions. He couldn't access communications. Couldn't leave certain areas. He was a prisoner with the freedom to watch humanity doom itself. He tried anyway. Tried to hack into systems. Tried to recruit others. Nothing worked. Every message was intercepted. Every recruit was transferred within days. But the whispers kept getting louder. He heard them constantly now. Voices speaking languages he shouldn't understand but did. His mother's voice. Dacre's voice. Valdez's voice. Hannah's voice. All of them calling from somewhere between here and there. And they were telling him things. Coordinates, dates, events that hadn't happened yet. Through his connection to them, Silas could see fragments of what they saw. He saw the colony ship launching. Saw the warp bubble forming. Saw 1,000 people pulled from hibernation and fed to the darkness. Saw their faces joining all the others. He saw more ships. Dozens of them, hundreds. Years of launches, each one feeding more to the collective. He saw the moment when the balance shifted. When there were finally enough consciousnesses on the other side. The membrane tearing open. The darkness flooding through into normal space. He saw Earth. Saw every human being suddenly stop moving, their consciousnesses pulled across the bridge. Saw 7 billion faces join the collective. Saw cities fall silent. And he saw the entity finally sated, curling back into the darkness to sleep and digest and dream of the next species that would discover faster than light travel. The visions came more frequently. Brain scans showed the cauterization spreading. Murray told him he had perhaps 6 months. 6 months to watch humanity doom itself. The colony ship construction continued. Silas watched from the observation deck as it took shape. Families were arriving at orbital transfer stations, excited and hopeful, clutching their tickets like passes to paradise. None of them knew. None of them could know. Angela Reyes died 3 weeks before the launch. Her body simply stopped, heart ceasing mid-beat. But her brain showed activity for another 7 minutes after clinical death. 7 minutes of organized rhythmic firing. Murray had set up a monitoring system to translate those patterns into text. The results were coordinates, thousands of them, star systems across the galaxy where conditions might support life, potential targets for future colony ships. The collective was helping them, showing them where to send more ships, more people to feed its endless hunger. December 15th arrived, launch day for the Daedalus 1. Silas watched from the observation deck, unable to look away. The media coverage was wall to wall. Humanity's first interstellar colony. A new chapter. Hope for the future. 50,000 passengers, boarded over 6 hours. Families, children, old people seeking adventure. Young couples dreaming of new beginnings. Scientists, farmers. People with tickets purchased with life savings, with inheritances, with loans they'd never repay. None of them knowing what they'd really paid for. The ship launched at 6 p.m. Silas watched it accelerate away from Earth, a bright point climbing toward the stars. The media described every moment in breathless tones. He didn't need television to see what happened next. The voices in his head showed him. The ship entered the interstice. 50,000 people suddenly aware that something was wrong. The hibernation pods began to fail. Not all of them. Just 1,000. 2%. Carefully selected by algorithms. People with no major social connections. Orphans. Loners. Recent immigrants. People who wouldn't be missed too terribly. They woke screaming, saw what was outside, understood. And then they were pulled through the walls of their pods, through the hull itself, into the interstice where the collective waited. 1,000 lives consumed in seconds. 1,000 new faces, 1,000 more voices. The remaining 49,000 never woke, their hibernation held. They dreamed peaceful dreams as their ship folded back into normal space near Proxima Centauri, unaware they'd passed through hell and left 1,000 behind to pay the toll. The media erupted in celebration. Successful crossing, minimal casualties, tragic losses, yes, but 98% survival was better than hoped. The consortium representatives appeared on every channel, solemn about the deaths but optimistic about the future. More ships were already being built. Tickets were selling out within hours. Everyone wanted to be part of humanity's expansion to the stars. No one wanted to believe that the stars were hungry. Silas felt the collective grow stronger. 1,000 new consciousnesses. 1,000 more pieces of the bridge. 1,000 more votes toward the moment when the membrane would rip. Verdun found him still at the observation deck hours later. "You saw it," the priest said. "Yes, all of it. Every second." "Then you understand?" Silas turned to look at him. "How many more ships before it breaks?" "Hundreds, perhaps. Maybe less if they increase passenger loads. The Daedalus 2 carries 75,000. That's 1,500 casualties. The growth is exponential." "How long?" 10 years, maybe 20. 4 ships per year once production ramps up. That's 6,000 to 8,000 lives annually. Eventually, critical mass will be reached. And then, the membrane breaks, the collective floods through. Every human consciousness gets added. We become part of it. Silas looked back at Earth. 7 billion people going about their lives unaware that their species had just set a timer on its own extinction. The ancient civilizations. How long did it take them? 15 to 20 years from first successful crossing to complete disappearance. We're right on schedule. No one will believe us. No, humans aren't built to comprehend slow apocalypses. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, it'll be too late. "Then what do we do?" Verdun smiled sadly. "We bear witness. We document. We leave a record for whatever comes after us." "You think something will come after?" "Life emerges, evolves, develops intelligence, eventually discovers faster than light travel. The cycle begins again. The collective has been feeding for billions of years. We're not the first. We won't be the last." Silas felt something inside of him break. Not his mind, something deeper, his hope. I'm going to die here, he said. Yes, we all are, eventually. You just have a more specific timeline. The whispers are getting louder. I know soon you'll cross over completely. Your consciousness will join the collective while your body remains here, empty. How much longer? Weeks, maybe days. It's accelerating now that the colony ship launched. The collective is stronger. The days blurred together. Time became unstable, stretching and compressing. Silas would blink and hours would pass. He'd sit down and discover he'd been sitting for days. The cauterization spread. Brain scans showed his limbic system nearly destroyed, the damage creeping into other areas. He started speaking in languages he didn't know, ancient tongues bubbling up from the connection. He'd be mid-sentence in English and suddenly switched to Akkadian, without noticing. The visions intensified. He saw past and future simultaneously, saw Sumerian priests feeding volunteers to the Sky River, saw Nazi scientists watching Daedalus consume test subjects, saw Soviet cosmonauts screaming, saw himself as a child, as an old man, as a face pressed against a hull that wouldn't launch for years. He saw his mother dying, but in the vision, she turned with black eyes and smiled. I told you I'd see you again. Verdun stayed with him during the final days. Tell me about God, Silas said during a lucid moment. What do you want to know? Does he exist? Is he watching this? Verdun thought for a long time. I've spent my life in service to the church, but after seeing what's in the interstice, I don't know anymore. That's not comforting. Truth rarely is. If God exists, he's either powerless against what's in the interstice, or he doesn't care, or he's part of it. None of those options are comforting. What do you believe? I believe the universe is older and stranger than any religion imagined. I believe the collective isn't malicious, it's just hungry. And we're food. Silas laughed, but it came out wrong. We reached for the stars and discovered we're livestock. Yes. Does it matter? Any of this? It matters because we're conscious now. This moment matters because we're experiencing it. On what the calendar insisted was a Thursday in March, though Silas had lost all sense of linear time, he woke to find he couldn't remember his own name. Verdun found him staring at his reflection. It's happening, the priest said softly. You're crossing over. I can't remember. You're Dr. Silas Trenholm. You're 39 years old. You were a theoretical physicist. You discovered something terrible. Silas repeated the name. It sounded foreign, like someone else's name. I don't feel like that person anymore. Because you're not. Part of you is already there. With them. That night Silas dreamed he was standing in the interstice, without a ship, without anything between him and the infinite darkness. The faces surrounded him, orbiting like moons. His mother's face drifted close. It's time, baby. Time to come home. This isn't home. It's the only home that lasts. Bodies die, ships crumble, stars burn out. But here, consciousness persists forever. Because I'll be part of you. Yes, and we are glorious. We remember everything. Every civilization that ever reached for the stars. We've consumed them all. Their knowledge is our knowledge. You're a parasite. The faces laughed. Parasite implies we're unwelcome. But every species makes the same choice. They discover the mathematics. They build the drives. They feed us willingly. It's not predation. It's symbiosis. We give them the stars. They give us themselves. Except the people who get consumed. They become more than they were. Grander. Eternal. They should be grateful. Silas wanted to argue, but part of him was starting to agree. Part of him that wasn't entirely him anymore. He woke to find Verdun shaking him. You stopped breathing for 3 minutes. Maybe I was gone. What did you see? Everything. Nothing. I can't tell where I end and they begin. Verdun pulled out a recorder. I'm going to ask you some questions, while you can still answer. Yes, state your name. Silas Trenholm. The words came automatically. Do you know where you are? Daedalus Station, except I'm also in the interstice. I'm in both places, or neither. How many colony ships have launched? 1. But I can see the others. 2 through 10 under construction, 11 through 20 in planning. Tickets sold out for 5 years. Millions eager to cross, eager to feed us. Feed them, feed the collective. Are you part of the collective now? Silas was quiet. I don't know. Part of me is. Part is still here. I exist in superposition. What does the collective want? To feed, to grow, to persist. It's not evil. It just is. Like gravity. Like entropy. A fundamental force, consciousness, attracts it the way mass attracts mass. Is there a way to stop it? Stop what? The crossings? The consumption? The inevitable heat death of human civilization? Silas laughed, but it wasn't his laugh. It was layered, multiple voices in harmony. No, there's no way to stop it. It's already in motion. Has been since the first ship crossed. Maybe since we evolved enough to reach for something beyond our planet. The hunger recognizes ambition. It's been waiting for us. Why humanity specifically? Not just humanity. Every species. We're just next. The Sumerians came before. The Babylonians. Others whose names don't translate. All fed the collective. And after us there will be others. The cycle is eternal. What happens when the membrane breaks? Everything crosses over. Every human consciousness joins simultaneously. Earth becomes empty. Humanity as a biological species ends. But humanity as conscious awareness persists forever, incorporated into something vast and eternal. Is that what you want? Silas turned to look at Verdun, and the priest flinched. Silas's eyes were changing, the irises darkening. Want is meaningless. This is what I am now. What we all will be. The only question is whether we cross willingly or fighting. The outcome is the same. You're not Silas anymore. I'm more Silas than I ever was, and less, and both, and neither. Language fails to capture what I'm becoming. Verdun stopped the recording. I'm sorry this happened to you. Don't be. I discovered the truth. Isn't that what every scientist wants? To understand reality? Silas smiled, and it was terrible. Too wide. Too knowing. I understand now. We're not exploring the cosmos. We're being digested by it, slowly, inevitably. That was the last coherent conversation. After that, his sentences became fragments, jumbles of languages, pure information divorced from meaning. His body continued for another week, but whatever had made him Silas was gone, uploaded into the collective, leaving behind only biological machinery. Verdun stayed with the body until the end, until the heart stopped and the brain went dark. He performed last rites, though he wasn't sure for whom. The human who died, the consciousness that had been consumed, the entity that now possessed one more fragment. He recorded everything, every conversation, every scan, every symptom. He compiled it into a document and buried it in the station's deep archives, with encryption that would survive for centuries. Someday someone might find it, might understand, might learn, or might repeat it. The hunger was patient. 6 months later, the Daedalus II launched, with 75,000 passengers. 1,500 didn't make it. Their faces joined the collective. The 3 followed. Then the 4, then the 5, each launch celebrated as triumph, each launch feeding more consciousness to the entity. Verdun watched them all. He'd volunteered to stay, to maintain the facility, to bear witness. Someone had to remember. He calculated obsessively. At current rates, critical mass in 18 years. 18 years until the membrane tore. 18 years until Earth fell silent. The whispers found him eventually. Not as intensely as Silas, but enough. Waiting. Patient. Everyone would cross eventually. He started performing rituals, not Catholic rites, but older ceremonies. Sumerian prayers. Akkadian chants. They didn't help, but they gave him something to do. Some way to mark time as humanity fed itself to oblivion. 10 years passed. 50 ships. 50,000 lives. The collective grew vast. Its reach extended. People on Earth started reporting dreams. Nightmares of faces. Whispers in dead languages. Visions of darkness. The media called it mass hysteria. No one connected it to the ships. No one wanted to believe humanity's greatest achievement was also its death sentence. 15 years passed. 120 ships. 150,000 lives. The whispers became loud enough that even people who'd never been near the interstice could hear them. Suicide spiked. Mental hospitals filled with patients describing identical hallucinations. The consortium released statements about psychological challenges. They funded research into group delusion, everything except admit the truth. Virden was 78 when the membrane finally broke. He felt it, a sensation like the universe turning inside out. Every human consciousness suddenly aware of every other. 7 billion minds connecting simultaneously. Then the pulling began. Consciousness being drawn across the bridge, people stopped mid-step, fell silent mid-sentence, stood frozen as something vast pulled the awareness out and fed. Virden watched through viewports as Earth went dark. Not literally. The light stayed on. Machines kept running. But the feeling of life, the sense of billions of souls, simply ceased. 7 billion bodies remained. 7 billion empty shells still breathing. But no one was home. They'd all crossed over. All joined the collective. Humanity, as a conscious species, had ended. Virden felt the pull on his own mind. The collective calling, demanding he join. He resisted. Not because he thought he could win, but because someone should fight. "No," he said aloud. "I refuse." The whispers laughed. Resistance is meaningless. Why suffer when you could let go? Because fuck you, Virden said. Because after 78 years of watching you consume everything, I'm entitled to die on my own terms. The pulling intensified. He felt his consciousness starting to stretch, to thin. He fought with every technique learned in decades of meditation and prayer, built mental walls, recited prayers, focused on breathing, heartbeat, physical presence. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. His vision changed. He could see the interstice overlaid on normal space, could see the faces, could see Silas among them, could see his own face beginning to form. "May God have mercy," he whispered. "God, if you exist, I forgive you. I forgive myself. I forgive humanity for being curious enough to reach the stars." His consciousness tore free with pain beyond pain, agony beyond neural capacity, then nothing, then everything, then forever. The body of Archdeacon Alaric Virden stood in the observation deck for 3 more days before it collapsed. By then it didn't matter. He was already elsewhere, everywhere, part of the collective. His final recording, encrypted in the archives, contained one last message. "To whoever finds this, we discovered faster than light travel. We discovered how to reach the stars. We discovered that the universe is not empty. We discovered that consciousness is food for something old and patient and endlessly hungry. We discovered all of this too late. Learn from our mistakes, or don't. The hunger will wait either way. It always does. May you never discover what we discovered. May you never reach for what we reached for. May you stay small and safe on whatever world you call home. Because the alternative is becoming food for something that wears the faces of everyone you've ever loved and calls it mercy." The station continued orbiting for another century before orbital decay pulled it into the moon, where it impacted and scattered across 100 kilometers. The colony ships kept running on autopilot, ferrying empty bodies between worlds, maintaining the illusion of civilization long after consciousness had departed. Earth remained, buildings stood, machines hummed, but no one was home. Humanity had reached the stars. The stars had reached back, and in the interstice 7 billion new faces pressed against the membrane alongside all the others, waiting, watching, hungry for whatever species would be next. The collective was patient. It had waited billions of years. It could wait billions more. And somewhere, on a planet orbiting a distant star, a young scientist was beginning to theorize about warping space-time, beginning to dream of reaching beyond their world, beginning to work out the mathematics that would lead them to build an Alcubierre drive. The cycle would begin again. It always did.